ExchangeWire's ATS Singapore conference returns on July the 2nd. Grab your ticket now and secure your place. You'll hear the latest on retail media, curation for marketing, the impact of AI on the industry, and much, much more. ATS Singapore 2025 will feature the latest insights from an exceptional group of speakers, highlighting future challenges and breakthroughs in media, marketing, and e-commerce. Visit exchangewire.com/events for more details.
Welcome to the MadTech Podcast from ExchangeWire, bringing you the latest news and views from the world of ad tech, media, and marketing.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the MadTech Podcast. I'm Grainne, ExchangeWire's Head of Marketing and your host for today. I'm delighted to be joined by Cian Lee, Media Strategist at Publicis Singapore. Cian, how are you today?
Hi, I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Delighted to have you with us. Alongside Cian is ExchangeWire CEO and co-founder Rachel Smith. Rachel, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you, G. Delighted to be on the podcast again.
Brilliant. Well, on today's podcast, we're going to dive into three major headlines that have revealed shifting dynamics of technology, politics, and culture. We're going to discuss Trump's decision to extend the TikTok ban enforcement deadline, a move that is shaped by ongoing tensions with China and the complexities of global trade. Then we'll explore how marketing's woke rebrand has inadvertently fueled the far right, raising questions about the intersection of corporate activism and political backlash. And finally, we'll turn to the future of AI, where DeepSeek and Tsinghua University are pioneering self-improving AI models, potentially reshaping the landscape of artificial intelligence. So first up, let's dive into President Donald Trump and TikTok. Trump announced last Friday that he is again postponing enforcement of the TikTok sale or ban law for 75 days. The delay comes after Trump's tariff announcement derailed a deal that had set to transfer control of the app's US operations to American ownership. Cian, on this topic, there's obviously a lot in the news about it, and there has been for a very long time, but what do you expect will happen next?
I think given the recent news developments of the additional 50% hike that puts the total level for import taxes on Chinese goods at 104%, and then it's only to be met by a hardline stance from China with a quick response of a counter tariffs, I reckon that we probably won't see a solution anytime soon as this tit-for-tat escalation continues.
Yeah. Rachel, what are your thoughts on this?
I think it's super interesting because obviously overnight we saw Trump reducing most tariffs down to 10% for countries where he'd imposed higher percentages in favour of a negotiation period over the next 90 days. But of course, China was excluded from that as he continues to embark on this tit-for-tat trade war, as Cian just characterised it. I do think that's going to continue to go on. Obviously, I think both China and the US have demonstrated that they're not willing to back down from this conversation about tariffs on imports of one another's goods. But I think that actually this is signalling somewhat a moment of realism where I think the US government is realising that they can't just keep escalating tariffs without any consequences. And so although this TikTok ban negotiation, shall we call it, because that's effectively what was happening, President Biden had put in place a potential proposal for ownership to shift from a Chinese entity to a US entity that would have some kind of stake held by ByteDance, the TikTok owner. And negotiations fell apart some weeks ago. Obviously, the trade tariff shenanigans has gotten in the way of that. But I think the US government is now in a position where they're realising that there's much graver consequences to their most recent activity, and the big thing that's underpinned Donald Trump's recent activities or overnight activities is that government borrowing for the US suddenly became virtually impossible. So once the bond markets pushed back and decided that interest rates needed to continue to rise in response to tariff activity, it meant that the US government could no longer afford to borrow what they need to carry out day-to-day operations, and they're not the only country that's in those shoes. So whilst that doesn't have anything to do directly with the TikTok negotiation, I think all of that is creating an economic climate where I think you will see sometime soon, so in the coming weeks, an opening, an opportunity for both China and US to sit around a table. They'll be using tariffs as the reason for that conversation. But I think what will be beneath that headline conversation is how can we then start to unlock some of these other difficult things that are coming down the line. I think a further interesting point, though, and I'm really interested in Xian's opinion on this, is how Trump actually feels about a US ban on TikTok, is because, you know, in his previous administration, he really played, and this is Donald Trump all over, right? Two different sides of the, you know, this is how we're going to handle big tech companies argument. So on the one hand, he wanted to be seen as tough towards big tech companies. But on the other hand, we know that he's very much America first and wants to be seen as being tough when it comes to anything to do with China. So I think the subsequent question for us to consider is, you know, how incentivized is he to get a deal across the line that means that TikTok wouldn't be suffering an outright ban in the US?
Honestly, I'm not privy to what's going on in his head, right? I don't really know what he's
Nobody
thinking about.
does. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
and what exactly is on the table in terms of negotiations. But I think personally, as a user, I just hope that TikTok doesn't get banned, even though I find myself spending too much time on it, you know, whether it's watching like silly pranks or like the K-pop dancers to like cooking recipes, because I think that TikTok has one of the better algorithms out there as a social platform, and that whenever I'm swiping on TikTok is actually swiping on me as well. So why I say that is because its algorithm balances between exploring and exploiting. And in an algorithm terms, it's basically that algorithm, an exploring mode. It tries to broaden your exposure to content that is more than just what you like, while exploit algorithm tends to only give you the kind of content that you have liked in the past. So I think it's a very good mix of, you know, giving you content that's both new and familiar, to really get you sustained and hooked on the platform.
Do you think that this is a political move, or do you reckon it is a genuine concern for national security? Xian, any thoughts on it?
Really hard to tell.
Yeah. Rachel,
Yeah.
any opinion on it?
I mean, I think that, I do think that there probably is some genuine skepticism around data security. But what I would say is that the Americans are as much you know, they're guilty of exactly the same sort of approach. It wasn't that long ago that in the EU we were debating laws over how Facebook should gather and collect data for EU users and whether it was legal for them to then use that data, hold that data in the US and use it for any kind of US security purposes. Effectively, what they wanted to be able to do was have permission. Well, in fact, they had permission protocols in place for all of their users outside the US that said we can use that data if we need to use it to understand whether there's any threats against US entities. And in the EU, that became a really hotly debated topic because the idea was, but that's not, you know, you're not protecting the user's data privacy. You're just you're just keeping that data for your own security purposes. And whilst you might be saying that the reasons for doing that aren't nefarious as far as you're concerned, it's still because it's a question of national security for you. We don't know if that's going to be in the best interests of these users, these individual users. And I think we're in the same position with China and TikTok. So whether, you could pass an opinion or not, whether you pass an opinion or not on what China's doing with that data, they're effectively wanting to put in place exactly the same protocols that Facebook once had in place for all of its users outside the US too. So I do think there is a genuine security concern. Whether Donald Trump himself has really got that security concern is another matter. But of course, this has been rolling along for quite a long time. So now I think it does look like it's much more of a political decision. But from a practical point of view, I think, what Xian just shared with us is really interesting, right? If you think about it from a user's point of view, it's a preferred social media platform for all of the reasons that Xian just gave, and also too because that's where a lot of social media users are going to find the content and the activity and the influencers and the celebrities that they're looking to follow. So I do think there will be we've already had a practical solution proposed and more or less effectively agreed upon to resolve the issue. And I do think that will prevail. It's just a case of when and what other kind of crazy shenanigans could happen in between now and then.
Well, yeah, it's stated that the ban would take effect on June 19th, which is the day that the deal must be reached by. So do you think that a deal will be met that would be beneficial to both parties? Cian, what do you think?
I think it's really too hard to tell, right? And I think one thing to consider as well is that this deal doesn't occur in a vacuum. There are other ongoing changes in the space around it as well. So it's hard to really tell. But for me, as long as I can continue using it, that's good for me. Yeah.
Rachel, have you got any thoughts on that? If you think something,
I think they'll definitely. I think it's almost certain that they'll be having conversations about this well before the deadline. They'll be wanting to do that to understand whether they have to extend a deadline or implement some kind of actual ban. I think it's going to come to a head much sooner than that, because I think that the tariff disagreements and tariff tussling is bringing this all to a head much sooner than expected.
Yeah. No, definitely. I guess there's a lot to watch on this, and things are changing hourly. So
they are.
Keep our eyes
definitely
peeled. Let's shift gear and move into our next news story, which is how marketing's woke rebrand has inadvertently empowered the far right. So in recent years, brands started marketing their values of diversity and inclusivity along with their services and products. Now, as we're met with brands adjusting to new policies and stripping away these values, Eugene Healy argues that social progress once came hand in hand with economic progress. Now, instead, social progress has been offered as a substitute for economic progress. Healy notes that multinational brands have been promoting social transformation while simultaneously being one of the largest contributors to declining living standards. Healy also says that marketers must reckon with how they're trivialised activism by turning it into a comm strategy and co-opted movements only to abandon them. So I guess maybe just putting it out there, what do you make of this argument, Cian?
Yeah, so I think before I respond, I just wanted to give a full disclosure as well that I'm a person with disability. So actually, I have achondroplasia, which is a form of short-limb dwarfism. And, as a disability inclusion advocate, I've spoken and written at length about disability inclusion. I've recently co-published a semi-fiction children's storybook based on my childhood years, and also appeared on national TV in a primetime documentary on my life story. So this topic of diversity and inclusion in marketing and media is quite near and dear to me. And I can somewhat see where Eugene is coming from, where brands have basically over-leveraged purpose at the expense of brand growth. And it seems like they have really gone too far into the good and not really pay enough attention to growth. And you can see that it's really starting to hurt them when the recession or the economic slowdown kicks in. And especially so because often at times the intention and action gap exists among consumers, where what people say and what people do differs greatly, as most customers aren't going to buy a brand exclusively based on the brand's purpose. But I think also, on the other hand, also, it's not that people will not buy the brand because of its purpose. I don't think customers are really paying much attention to this, and it's more of the outreach machine at work in the news cycle. So, it seems like people are not really engaged on this topic. And what I see is that, marketers are now developing a more mature brand purpose mindset, right? Where it's no longer the panacea that every brand must adopt or fail, where it's more of the icing on the cake rather than the cake itself. Yeah, but I'm not saying that, there isn't a business case for brand purpose, right? It's not an argument against purpose, because there's evidence out there that shows, the ads with social issues, ads with diversity and inclusion can be equally powerful, if not more as well.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Rachel, what are your views on it?
I think it's really interesting that CNU, the phrase that you used there is that brands have been focusing on sort of purpose over growth. And so I think that where we're headed with this is that brands have really got to focus on the bottom line first and foremost, right? So I suspect that we're getting back into a period of time where the main KPI that marketers are tasked with, which is sell more stuff, is going to be, ought to be the focus of their strategy, not just their practical day-to-day activities. So if it is about how do we sell more stuff, then similar to CN mentioning there, about where purpose fits into that, that should be a sort of underlying principle rather than a quick fix novelty that we can add to our marketing campaigns that might get people's attention. I think, though, the wider question of, whether in marketing terms, social progress is being sort of elevated above other things. I think one of the contradictions here, and Eugene Healy sort of outlines this in the article's argument, is that social progress was achieved at a particular time in history as a result of economic progress. And actually, we've stopped talking about economic progress, particularly in developed and advanced economies, because economic progress is quite difficult, to be honest with you, for most people. Our standards of living are already quite high. That doesn't mean to say that there isn't economic inequality in our societies. There is. And in very advanced economies and very capitalist-driven economies, those equalities are becoming, greater than they've ever been before. But we've stopped talking about all of that, and instead we're just focusing on this social purpose side of marketing. I suspect that lots of marketers, when that became a real trend a few years ago, were probably quite relieved at the notion that maybe we don't have to constantly focus on the sort of product differentiation side of marketing. We can now actually also incorporate a social message in our marketing activities. And there will have been people that had personal passions, or people who were, as CN mentioned, people that wanted to advocate on behalf of the life experiences that they've had, and to be able to, create social change or be part of social change for other people. And I think that was probably an exciting time to be a marketer. I'd suggest that we don't need to be moving away from that. We need to continue to have that as part of reasons as to why brands create products and the ways in which they promote their products. But I still think they need to keep a very firm eye on the bottom line. And I think we actually need to match all of that back to economic progress or economic state of affairs. So we need to be mindful of the fact that in developed economies, actually average people are doing it really tough because cost of living crisis is very real. And then in more developing economies, we need to be thinking about not just pushing products and selling products for the sake of making money, but actually we need to think more, we have to be more thoughtful about the way in which we're developing products from a social point of view. So I think we need to start paying attention to all of these things in the round. And I think what happened is people got really excited about the notion of marketing on the basis of social purpose and sort of stopped focusing on the bottom line and allowed perhaps the industry, not just marketers, but the advertising industry in general, to open ourselves up to criticism that we were being hypocritical. I think we've all got the capability to move beyond that, right?
Yeah, Richard, I totally agree with you. I think it's really a case of what Mark recently calls as bothism, right? Where purpose is not at odds with growth. Actually, it can work hand in hand. And I think the data has also shown as well that, having more inclusive ads, it is equally effective as any other ad, even with broad audiences. Even when it's driven towards mass market audiences. Research from System 1, research from, various other sources, including Dr. Grace Kite as well, has shown, that inclusive ads are more likely to be first choice, and it helps the brand to really have that higher pricing power, more consideration, and improve trialing and loyalty outcomes. So I think the good news is that, you'll not be penalized for supporting diversity, whether it's your short-term sales impact or your long-term brand building potential of your campaign. But what I have to say is that, how I feel about this is that, honestly, I feel quite jaded because I entered this industry being very inspired by all these purpose campaigns, only to realize that it was predominantly crafted to win an award rather than actually raising awareness or being at the core of what the company is. And I think, when we want to talk about purpose, we need to know that the purpose of purpose should be about purpose, where we do it because we really believe in it, even if it costs us something, and for me, it's really about how then do I be a storyteller and really to tell stories that draw people into my world, stories that is representative, that allows me to develop empathy for other people and really make us more inclusive.
And there has to also presumably be, if we were to think about this from a very draconian point of view, marketers trying to shift units and sell products, there's also the argument to suggest that this is a bigger audience as well. If you actually make your marketing messages and also design products for a more inclusive audience, that's more people that you can potentially be be selling things too, right? So
Yes.
actually, if we start to open up our perspective, so if we first, start targeting our messages and our marketing to a much broader and more inclusive audience, then we make sure that that's underpinned genuinely by a sense of purpose. Then we're starting to sell products and design products from the point of view of what type of products are going to be useful and consumable in everyone's lives, not just in the lives of a particular subsection of the population.
Yeah, totally. I think, representation really matters, like because seeing people that look like you or relating to characters and being able to connect to a reality that or culture or experience even that is not commonly shared by others can be very powerful and healing, right? And if our ads do not shift, if our products do not shift, then what you'll see is that our culture and our sales basically does not shift as well.
Yeah, and you've kind of touched on it slightly, but my next question would be, what do you think brands should be doing now in the current climate? And are there any brands that you think are doing what you would like them to be doing? Is there anyone that you kind of put as a benchmark for other brands to kind of follow their lead? Siam, what are your thoughts on it?
I think brands need to understand that purpose advertising is not a solution for like poor business practice, as a form of woke washing, but rather that the purpose of purpose should be purpose, where, brands are doing it because they want it and because they believe it's a right thing to do, even if it costs them something. When brands do because it is right and not because it's convenient or because somebody is watching them, right? And I think because you see that representation and visibility, really drives emotional engagement and positivity of those that is represented, and it serves really to signal to people who don't feel part of it. They end up feeling part of it as well, and that's a really huge real world benefit to the lives of these people. And these people are not just consumers. They're also real people who also run the brand and marketing agencies. That make these everyday choices. So how can brands really do it? And what's one example? I think, brands can actually consider taking a stand in subtler, more playful ways that doesn't really create a lot of polarization. So one example is actually Lego's global campaign, right, where they focus on really inspiring kids and adults alike to be more creative with their thinking and encourage them to, rebuild the world. And what this campaign creative basically featured was, Lego constructed visions of what a better world could be, with images that cleverly promoted cultural and political ideals like environmentalism and gender inclusiveness as well. So I think this comes down to three things for us to think about, right? Purpose for brand, purpose for the consumer themselves, and purpose for a long time. And I guess for purpose for a brand is really about asking, as marketers, whether the brand really has a precedent or really a history, of working for a certain cause, to have a right to play. Would it make sense on why they're launching this campaign or supporting this cause? For consumers, really about how much do they identify with this brand cause? Does it center around them and will it impact their lives positively in solving a problem for them? And I think it needs to be done for a long time, right? Not just a single campaign that goes to Cannes or goes to an award show and then that's the end of it. I think it shouldn't be a one-off thing. If a brand or if anyone is really getting behind a cause, they have to be in it for the long haul, right? The most important problems aren't created overnight and they're also not solved overnight as well, right? So, it's really about doing something that will make a lasting impact and then do more, right? Because it doesn't end with a campaign. It really should be the start of something new.
Rachel?
Yeah, I think that that final point about it not being something that's short term and actually it needs to be something that's got some kind of long term strategic vision in there, I think is really important. What I think marketers could be doing right now is actually getting back to product differentiation and innovation in order to compete for what is effectively very hard won consumer budgets, right? Like that people are, again, in developed economies, people are very conscious about what they're spending and where, because money's tight typically right across the socioeconomic range. And so in that environment, people will be making choices about their discretionary spend. This is where marketers have got an opportunity to stand out through, not just their strategic approach, but actually what they're doing with their products. And so they should really be baking the principles of social change into product innovation and design and differentiation, and they should be going back to those basic marketing principles of understanding how to communicate that product differentiation to a wide-scale audience, a much more diverse audience, and really leaning on those fundamental basics of why their product is great, why it's a good fit for you as well as you and you and you, and why, what makes it competitive, why you should be buying it and why you should be buying it now.
Yeah, no, that is great insights from both of you. And Cian, I liked how you put it, that the purpose of purpose is purpose. So yeah, something just for everyone to think about. Well, let's move on to our third and final story for this podcast. So we've seen DeepSeek working with Tsinghua University on reducing the training its AI models need in an effort to lower operational costs. The company collaborated with researchers from the Beijing Institution on a paper detailing an approach to reinforcement learnings to make models more effective. This new model aims to help AI models work better, adhere to human preferences by offering rewards for more accurate and understandable responses. It has been proven effective, but expanding it to more general applications has proven challenging. DeepSeek's team is currently working on solving this with something it calls self-principled critique tuning. DeepSeek is calling these new models DeepSeek GRM, which is short for generalistic reward modelling. How revolutionary could this method be for the AI landscape, Rachel? What are your thoughts?
I think it could be in that from, what I understand, and of course my understanding of this will be very limited, but what I understand is that this is if you like, the next iteration of how sophisticated AI models could become. So this generalist reward modeling that DeepSeek have come up with as a result of the work and activity that they've done with the university in China means that it's effectively a new way to alter and train large language models so that they become more scalable and more adaptable. And it's combining the existing modeling infrastructure that most AI models that we'd be familiar with, LLMs and various other AI tools. It's combining that existing infrastructure, which was called mixture of experts, with this new type of infrastructure to make the way that AI models are trained faster, but also cheaper. So there's the efficiency angle, the efficiency because of speed, but also efficiency because it hasn't cost them as much money to train those models as it was initially costing to train models before the iteration of this type of infrastructure. So it's potentially super powerful, and I think it signals the kind of next stage in development for AI models that we're used to interacting with and dealing with and using. So I think it's obviously innovative, and it's extremely interesting that DeepSeek have managed to do this at the pace that they've managed to do it. It does require still, though, obviously, it's not sort of widely available yet. So it does require, obviously, still more testing, and there's bound to be some issues and some hiccups along the way. But I think it puts them at the forefront of the race with their competitors to becoming a sort of default infrastructure for AI models and training, and that's super exciting, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Cian, anything that you want to share on what we've seen here from DeepSeek and their work with the university?
I think what Rachel covered is basically it, right? That it's going to be a cheaper alternative. It's a lot more cost efficient, and I think it helps to also reduce the amount of hallucinations through reinforcement learning. I think all of this is ultimately really allow DeepSeek to reach AGI level, or artificial general intelligence, where it can solve problems in various domains like a human being, without much manual intervention.
Yeah. So we've seen Chinese tech giant Alibaba and San Francisco-based OpenAI are also pushing into a new frontier for improving reasoning and self-refining capabilities within the AI model and its performing tasks in real life. How do you think DeepSeek then are currently faring in its competition against other AI tech giants like these?
So I think that's exactly it, is that they have actually, this appears to be an example of them getting the jump on their competitors. And I think their main secret sauce is that they are able to achieve some of this at a much lower cost than their main competitors have been to date. But I think there are some challenges potentially coming down the line here. So they've managed to do things really cost efficiently up till now, and it will no doubt be because they've got significant manpower. They've developed, partnerships like this one with university to accelerate their technology development. But now that we're starting to, and they've really got a very aggressive sort of open source strategy here. So their idea is they want to make their technology as open source as possible so that people can use it, test it, improve it. And the hope is that it will then become the default architecture of most AI models. And I think they're they're at the front of that race at the moment, and they stand every chance of being able to achieve that. However, these incumbent challenges that you mentioned there, G, are big global companies that have got really deep pockets, are extraordinarily profitable. They've got a lot of cash to burn. So you can't imagine that they're sitting around on, doing nothing. They'll be busy in the background developing things as fast and as quickly as they can, and looking to get that extra edge on top of what's already been achieved here by DeepSeek. So there'll be that. Like, how deep are their pockets? They've obviously, like I said, got the manpower and got the wherewithal to get as far as they've gotten, much more efficiently and much cheaper than their competitors. But how long will that continue? Then I think we're also talking about technology that is based in China and that is coming out of China. So I do think that they're going to face geopolitical and potentially regulatory headwinds in the same way that anything that's going on between China and the rest of the world is at the moment. And then I think there's that kind of under the umbrella of trust and transparency, there'll be a cultural attitude to this. Will it be the case that as consumers, we'll all just jump on the latest AI model and start using it for day-to-day queries and actioning because it's the fastest, or it's the best, or it's the newest? Or will there be some, sort of cultural attitudes towards this that will make people concerned about whether it can be trusted? And it's not just the use of it, it'll also be, what information it's used to train the model on, and, how trustworthy are those information sources. Personally, I think that if we sort of grouped those three challenges in headings like cost, geopolitical headwinds, and trust and transparency, I actually think trust and transparency is probably the least of their challenges, because I think, like most technology innovations, this is going to catch up with us faster than we can wrap our heads around it. So we'll just wind up using whatever platform is the most efficient before we know it. But I do think that those are three areas that will be challenges for them.
Anything else, Ian, that you want to add to that, or are you in agreement with Rach?
I guess if I had to find a metaphor or like a parallel, to the AI space, I think, OpenAI basically marks the start of like the camera in the phone era, right? Where just like how everyone had access to a really portable camera as a tool, OpenAI has basically unlocked the technical barrier in using AI. And I think in a very short interim, we're just going to see a lot of incremental upgrades, right? Similar to how it was a competition of pixels from 5 to 10 to 50, and from 1 lens to 4 lens to multi-million sensors, right, on the back of a smartphone. And I think we're in this point in time where other AI giants are really playing catch up with DeepSeek, but yet every now and then there'll be another giant that comes along to disrupt with something really new, something that's really revolutionary, and then everyone else will scramble to follow and replicate, and then the cycle continues. And my hypothesis, if I had to look into the crystal ball, would be that there'll be two types of AI. One that provides a fairly closed ecosystem with really preset features to the user, that focuses more on the ease of use, where the interface and operating system is intuitive, it is user-friendly. And the other kind would be one that is more of like your console or command prompt, right? That really suits the super user. So this would be, the AI that's meant for engineers and the computer scientists who are really driving the charge in AI. And I guess linking this back to marketing, I reckon that probably the first type will be mainly used by marketers, and the dominant AI player will then be the one that is, not just able to build the best user interface or user experience for them, but one that's able to really operate at speed and scale, through acting as an agent in the back end that really optimizes the mix of models to really carry out the task behind the scene. So, in this AI space, I took a quick research, right? And we're seeing, the likes of Gumloop, Zapier, ZoomInfo, and they're actually partnering with CRM solutions like HubSpot or generative AI like Canva to plug and play, kind of like this open source thing that Rachel was basically talking about as well, right? Where, the mix of models where it's able to come in, to form a robust network instead of a walled garden. Who exactly would this be? It's too early to tell, but what I know is that AI can only get as good as the quantity and the quality of the users. And then this comes back to a matter of cost, right, and efficiency, because we see that, users are very promiscuous. They'll just switch to whichever AI is the latest and whichever AI player really gives them the most tokens or GPUs to play.
And I think that's a really interesting point, right? If this is the beginning of the camera phone era, then who is going to be that company that really dominates the landscape, provides all of the infrastructure that captures that volume of users, that enables it to continue to iterate and improve its product. And clearly that's what DeepSeek are going for. Will they be able to manage it? It'll be super interesting to see, right?
100%. I don't think anyone has any loyalty, so they'll happily switch to what's best for them.
That's right.
Excellent. Well, yeah, thank you so much. We've covered a lot of ground here, from geopolitics to digital influence and the evolution of AI. Cian, we're really looking forward to having you join us at ATS Singapore on July 2nd. You'll be joining the onstage conversations, and you'll be joining a panel on consumer attention, which definitely lends to some of the topics that we've covered today. So we're delighted to have you join us.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, and I can't wait to pay attention to attention.
Love it.
We'll have to include that somewhere on the panel discussion. Great. Well, yeah, thank you both for joining me today. Really appreciate both your input, Rachel and Cian.
Thanks, Chi.
Thank you.
And thank you everyone for listening. That's it for the MadTech Podcast this week, and we look forward to tuning in next week.
You've been listening to the MadTech Podcast, brought to you by ExchangeWire.